Hey, it's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. On the show today, I'm speaking with Lyn McLean, who is the founder and managing director of EMR Australia, Australia's leading resource for creating EMR-safe homes, businesses, and learning environments, and reducing exposure to electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation. Lyn has been working in this field since 1996 and brings a commitment to helping people and over 2 decades of experience to her work. Now, I've known Lyn for many years, even before tiny homes, and she's helped me to navigate hardwiring my internet. And then with my tiny home, she was very helpful during the design process where I was navigating how to electrically wire a tiny home safely and communicating that to the building company, as well as navigating which kind of solar system would be best for me and just questions to ask different solar companies and electricians. She also helped me to navigate what to look for when finding a parking space on my tiny home when it comes to reducing electromagnetic fields and so much more. And in this conversation, we talk about what to consider and ask your tiny house designer, builder, or electrician when electrical wiring a tiny home, the best way to lay out and design a tiny home to minimize EMF exposure. We also talked about hardwiring your internet in a tiny home, what to ask a solar company or your tiny house builder when it comes to an off-grid solar system and reducing EMFs, some health effects of EMF exposure, and I asked Lyn how we actually know that these can be caused or linked to EMFs, and industry-funded science around EMFs and what the science actually says overall about the damaging health effects of EMF exposure, and so much more. Now, this is a topic that is absolutely huge and we could talk about it for days, and this is why this is a second episode on reducing electromagnetic fields in your tiny home. If you haven't listened to episode number 32 with naturopath Amy Skilton, which was the first episode on this topic, I'll put a link in the show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com. And if you're someone that likes to look into the science around these types of things, I'm putting some links in the show notes as well, including a link to the EMR Australia blog, which is one of the only ones in the world that has the key research in an easy to understand format, as well as the ORSA database, which we also mentioned in the last episode. All right, let's get to the show. So on to this tiny house conversation with Lyn. Lyn, welcome to Tiny House Conversations. I'm so grateful to have you here and thanks for being on the show.
Lucy, it's my absolute pleasure and thank you very much for having me. It's always nice to talk with you.
It is always nice to talk with you. I know that you and I've known you for several years now and you've been so helpful for me navigating the whole EMF side of, when I was designing my tiny home and setting everything up. But even before the whole tiny house thing, I knew you because, I'd come into contact with what you're doing with EMR Australia. And you've been really helpful for me even, when I was living in a regular home, setting up hardwired internet and, measuring electromagnetic fields and all of that. And so it's been really great to, and actually we've done a podcast together a lot, like many years ago when I had another podcast. So it's good to have you back in a different way, but obviously this topic is still very important, especially in a small space like a tiny home. So before we dive into lots of things to do with EMFs and tiny homes, I'd love if you're able to just let us know a bit about your background and how you came to be educating people on the health effects and considerations of electromagnetic fields and how EMR Australia came to be.
Yes, Lucy, that could go on for quite some time, that conversation.
I know.
But I suppose that there are many aspects of that. And I suppose when I talk to different people, I give different parts of the story. So it doesn't mean I'm lying. It just means that it's a long story. But it goes back to about in the mid-1990s. I was actually working in an environment centre. So I was essentially running that environment centre, and one of the groups within the environment centre was dealing with electromagnetic fields. And I thought, that's great. I'm very happy for them to deal with that. I got more involved in that group, and as I did, I learned things. I learned things, I suppose, about electromagnetic fields, but what I also learned that really distressed me was that there are a lot of people in Australia, and this is going back a long time, that were really struggling, were really having problems with exposure to electromagnetic fields. And back in those days, it was before the rollout of lots of mobile phones and lots of mobile phone towers. So we're talking about power lines and meter boxes and electrical stuff going on in homes. And they were so sensitive that they would come to our group, which was really the only place in Australia you could get information, and they would ask questions. And a lot of times I didn't know the answers, but I could tell that they were distressed. So I would find out the answers and then I would get back to them. So that's really how it started, my involvement in that group. And then the woman who was running that group actually resigned. And then because I was running the Environment Centre, it became my responsibility. So there was a big learning curve after that. But I haven't really been able to let go of this issue, which is probably not what I would have chosen to be involved in life. But I've never stopped having calls or emails from people who are distressed. And, so we're talking nearly 30 years now. And what I've seen is that the problems have got bigger in society and the number of people affected have got larger. So there is a need to be able to help people. So my very first book, which is called What's the Buzz, which I think is up. Yeah, it's up on the top of
there.
On the top of the filing cabinet. That was me writing things to really answer my own questions, because back in the day, our authorities would say there's no evidence of risk, and I thought, well, hang on, how come I'm looking at studies that are showing evidence of risk? Oh no, there's no evidence of risk, they said. So I said, well, I'll write it down. I'll write the evidence of risk and I'll write the solutions. And so that's how that book came about, which took, I think, about 5 years to write, and then, subsequent books too. So this really has been a big journey of learning for me, but I've never let go of the fact that people are hurting out there, and that we can't just say, oh, well, let's forget about that and go and use some dangerous technology and make the problem worse. It's not about that. It's about, how do we help people? How do we create a society that is actually a little bit more responsible so that other people can live safely? And how do I live in a way that's not hypocritical? So, for example, I have nothing wireless in my home. I think you know that. And I have, well, really no problem fields in my home. And if I walked around using my mobile phone or my whatever it might be, then I would not be able to really give advice to people about, well, how you actually can live without a mobile phone. And I have a mobile phone, I just don't use it and I just don't need it. So I feel like my journey has enabled me to understand how we can set up technology more safely, and hopefully can help people, because there are still a lot of people out there suffering, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. And I think the more that we continue to advance and all this technology that has just become such a big part of our culture now around the world, even in really remote places that you wouldn't expect mobile phones or a cell tower or something to be, it is really something that's here. And as you say, I suppose it's not about getting rid of all these things, because that is just, I don't even know how that would happen, but it's using it in a safe way and then getting that education out to people and safer ways to use and relate to our technology, but also the more concerning parts about, especially I think all the wireless things that are out now that continue to come out, and everything's a smart device and there's Bluetooth. For anyone listening, so I did do an episode with naturopath Amy Skilton on EMFs as well. We're going to be focusing on slightly different things today because it's such a big topic, but I would recommend going to check out that episode as well. So I'll put a link in the show notes. But we did talk about the different types of fields especially wireless, electric, and magnetic, but I know there's more to that. And today we're going to be focusing a bit more also on electrical wiring in a tiny home, because that's something that, especially if someone is building their tiny home from scratch, which a lot of people are these days, they actually have a really good opportunity and they have the power to, if they have the right information, to actually set themselves up in a healthier way when it comes to strategic electrical wiring. So, are you able to, in that space, just let us know a little bit about, like, if someone is going through the design process of a tiny home and they're not 100% sure, like, what they should be asking about the designer or the builder, or even if they're dealing with an electrician themselves, what are a few things that they can sort of look out for? And then what, from your perspective, what would be an optimal way to wire a tiny home?
The thing is, as you said before, there are three main fields in a home for people to think about. So we've got magnetic and electric fields, and they come from electrical sources. So your wiring, your power lines, your appliances, and things like that. And then you've got on top of that the radio frequency fields, or wireless radiation, as I call it, which comes from all your wireless devices and your connection to the internet, or so on. So when you're talking about any home, and a tiny home in particular, those are the things that you need to look at. And that's where the evidence is showing harmful effects from exposure to high fields. And when I say high fields, I mean fields that still comply with the Australian guidelines, but are nevertheless what we would consider to be high. So to start with the magnetic fields. Now, the magnetic fields are the ones that have been associated with childhood leukemia and with leukemia at levels that are, hundreds of times lower than the Australian standard. So reducing exposure to that just makes complete and absolute sense. Now, the thing with magnetic fields is that they can be really high at the source, but they drop off really quickly with distance. So if you were to go and stand in front of your toaster or your electric jug or your oven where there's a digital clock, and you measure with a magnetic field meter, you'll find quite high fields, generally speaking. But as you stand back 20 centimetres, 30 centimetres, 40 centimetres, 50 centimetres, you'll see those fields dropping off with distance. And it's the same thing with electric fields too. They drop off with distance as well. So the key thing is that when we're building a new place, we really want to make sure that we have a distance between us and those fields. It doesn't mean you've got to throw your toaster out, your electric jug out, because you don't spend a lot of time standing next to your jug or next to your toaster, I presume, or even maybe next to your electric oven. So when we're thinking of an ordinary house, we've got a bit more distance because we might have the wiring here, we can put the bed over there, or the ceiling lights are up here, but our bed's down there. But in a tiny home, everything is closer together. So it's more critical that you look at where the wiring goes. So the key places that you want to reduce exposure are obviously where you spend a lot of time. So that will be your bed, and it will be maybe your lounge where you're sitting, or if you've got a desk that you spend a lot of time at, you want to make sure that your fields are really low in those spots. So then you're going to think about, well, where do you want the wiring to actually go? Now, the place that the wiring normally goes in most homes, and I guess most tiny homes too, is right behind the bed, because the electricians love giving us lots of PowerPoints there, which means all that wiring is going right behind the bed. So you've got high electric fields mainly, but you might have a few high magnetic fields there as well. So we don't actually need the wiring to go there. The wiring could be somewhere else altogether. Now, we've actually got a course for electricians that is relatively new, and it teaches electricians about these fields, because electricians are not trained in electric fields or magnetic fields or in fact, radio frequency fields. So they don't know, number one, that these fields should be reduced, and they don't know how to. So I would say talk to your electrician, get your electrician to do this course. Now, I've had a couple of people who are having houses built, And they've done the course too, even though they're not electricians, so they can understand what it is they should be aiming for, so that they can make sure that their electrician does that, doesn't slip wiring in where you don't want it. So your key things, as I said, are going to be your bed. If your bed's upstairs and you've got lights underneath it, you're going to have wiring going to the lights. That wiring is going to be running right under your bed. If your bed's sitting on your mattress, sorry, is sitting on the floor, then that wiring is going to be very close to the mattress and to where your body is. If you've got a small space, maybe for your bedroom, then you'll have lights above you perhaps, and those lights again are going to be very close to your head. So the position of the wiring is really very important. And that brings us to appliances too, because things like ovens, things like fridges have got motors in them, have got wiring in them that can emit quite high magnetic fields. So you don't really want that located where you're going to spend time. So a terrible situation would be to have your bed on one side of the wall and your oven or your fridge on the other side of the wall, where those magnetic fields are going straight through. Or another example, your bed on one side of the wall and maybe your meter box or your inverter on the other side of the wall. So when you're thinking of the design of the whole place, you want to be thinking about, where can I put my bed so that it's separated from these appliances, and I've got that distance that allows me to maybe put the wiring up this end and have less wiring down that end where I'm spending more time. That's a pretty rough sketch, but I hope that gives you a bit of a picture.
Definitely. It's definitely a starting point. What I'm hearing is the main things are minimizing your exposure, especially in a smaller space, on where you would spend the most time. And where we would spend the most time is when we're sleeping and maybe when we're in the lounge area or work area, especially if you're working from home. And this is why I'm so passionate about talking about this topic when it comes to tiny homes, because I can see I could have a look at a photo of a tiny home, and I'm sure you would definitely be able to look at a photo of a tiny home and actually just see from first glance all the ways where that home hasn't been optimized for minimizing electromagnetic fields and that exposure, because you do see, I've seen especially in the smaller models, like the more Airbnb models, where there's a bed and then like literally right next to the bed is like a mini bar fridge. And I see that and I go, oh no, like that. Or even light fittings right behind, like at the bed head, right? Like
Yeah.
right here where you're sleeping, and you just see so many of these things. And I know for me, like when I was designing my tiny home and I was consulting with you, and it was really helpful because I can actually feel the difference in my sleeping loft, where there's no light fittings or anything, there's no wiring at all, compared to when most of it's down the other end of the house, where I've got the storage loft, where the only sort of time I go up there, and it's very quick, is just to switch on the PowerPoint for my satellite internet, or maybe to grab some things from the storage loft, or store things up there, but it's very quick. And I can actually feel it, because I feel like I'm quite sensitive to these types of fields. And look, not everyone is going to be, or maybe realizes that they are, and they're thinking it could be something else, right? But yeah, like I think we've got such an opportunity to educate builders in this space, especially, but of course people living in tiny homes, because they're the ones that are going to be in their home for a really long time. And you helped me to hardwire my internet. And, because a tiny home is a smaller space, say, than a regular home, where, if you're I think a lot of people like the convenience of being able to be wherever they are in their home, and then, they can have that Wi-Fi signal, whether it's on their phone or their laptop or whatever. But for me, I've always been like, well, I don't care if it's a little bit inconvenient, or if I have to have a really long cord, running through a certain area. I'd rather that than the potential health effects that can have. Are you able to just let us know, when you're talking about hardwiring things, just specifically around like the internet and all of that, because that's a very common thing for most people. More and more people are working from home in tiny homes and being location independent. Just maybe a quick run through of how that setup would look like. I know that it'll be different depending on what service providers they have, and some people only have satellite, whether it's Starlink. I'm with Sky Mesh, which is out here. Some people might have access to, Aussie Broadband and other ones, but just considerations around hardwiring your laptop or your desktop for internet in a tiny home.
Thanks for asking that question. That's really important, Lucy, because when I was talking before about the wiring, that deals with the electric and the magnetic fields. So that's two of the three that I talked about to start with. But that third one is the wireless radiation. And, we could write a book on that ourselves. In fact, I have.
You have.
Yeah. Wireless radiation is probably one of the biggest problems in the home, and I mean any home at the moment. And if you're in a tiny home, it's even a bigger problem because, as you say, it's a question of space. That means that you're closer to all of those wireless devices. The closer you are to them, the more radiation you are getting from them. And I can't stress the risks of wireless radiation too much because it is causing all sorts of problems to people. We're talking about research showing increases in brain tumours. We're talking about sperm damage and testicular damage that's connected with infertility. We're talking about cancers. We're talking about a whole host of symptoms like memory and concentration problems, pain, nausea, irritability, tinnitus, depression, sleep problems, behaviour problems. How many kids do we see with behaviour problems today? And there's quite a link between this exposure and behaviour problems like ADHD sorts of behaviours. So that is, for me, the incentive that we want to be reducing our exposure. Now, mostly people think, oh, well, it's all coming from the equipment outside my place, from my neighbours or the phone tower there or wherever. But what I think it's important for people to understand is not necessarily, because these days the majority of people's exposure comes from their own devices that they're paid money for, they've got inside their homes, their tiny homes, and that they're using right near their body. So reducing that or changing that picture, I think, is really incredibly important. So the starting point is the modem. If you've got a modem from probably just about anybody else, your modem will be emitting wireless radiation, and most wireless modems these days do not turn off the wireless. And I feel like I have to keep saying that because when I give a talk and I say that, people always say, oh yeah, but mine's turned off. And I have to keep saying, well, it probably isn't, because when you think it's off, it's not. And if you press the little button at the top that says, I've turned Wi-Fi off, and you measure with a meter, you'll see that modem or that router is, generally speaking, still giving out radiation. So the only way that we can be sure that it's not giving out radiation is if we turn it off at the power point. And then people will say to me that, oh, well, I turn it off at the power point. And I think, well, that's great, but it's only safe when you're not using it. So what's the point of that? So if we actually want to use something safely, the question is, why would you buy wireless modem routers when you can buy non-wireless, non-radiating modems and routers? Now, we have those, and we can set up one or several pieces of equipment. So we send it out to people anywhere they are in Australia, and you can connect this to your devices. You can have radiation-free internet. If you want, you can have a landline phone, depending on your situation. And so that's what I have here. I'm talking to you on my radiation-free computer with my radiation-free modem router and my radiation-free phones and my radiation-free speaker. And so I'm still connected using the technology, but I'm not getting any of those harmful fields from it. So that's possible for everyone. And this is really important because if you've got a wireless modem router and you're connecting your mobile phone to it and your smart TV and your tablets and devices, you just imagine that all of those devices, that there's a little red haze coming out, all of them, and it's extending quite a long distance. And then if you add all of that together, your entire home is probably covered in a haze or a pulsing haze of radio frequency radiation. And some of the modem routers now are so powerful that they can send signals that travel far enough to cover an entire farm. Now, one of those could be sitting in your place, in your tiny home. It could be sitting in your flat. It could be sitting in your house. So can you imagine how much exposure people are getting from these devices when we don't even need that radiation to connect to the internet anyway? So your best option is to have radiation-free equipment. Now, you can connect to satellites with it. We have found that it doesn't connect terribly well to Starlink. So that's something, if people are going to think about what kind of satellite connection you want in a tiny home that's in a remote area, you might want to think about that.
Yeah, because I think Starlink seems to be more popular for tiny homes these days too. And yeah, the wireless thing is also an interesting one when you're talking about having all these wireless devices inside your home, including your modem and then your mobile phone. Maybe you've got a smart oven, even like everything's becoming smart
Yeah.
and Bluetooth and wireless, right? And that was something that with your help, I was adamant with the tiny building company. I'm like, I don't want anything wireless in my home. I do have a smartphone, but my phone's actually off all day. And this is probably just something for, I guess, anyone, just like a little tip for anyone, right? I've actually set things up now so that my internet's wired, my laptop's wired, all of that. And I've measured that I've got a really good building biologist meter, and the fields are in the green, very, very low. But I actually make phone calls through the internet. So if I've got WhatsApp or if I've got Signal or Telegram, which is something that a lot of people use these days for communication overseas, but also even just around Australia, I put all of them on my laptop so that I can make phone calls through there. And I don't actually need my my smartphone really at all. It's off all the time. I might twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, to go outside and turn it on just to check and see if any regular phone calls came on. But actually I don't, unless it's a random marketing call, that doesn't really happen anymore. And the other thing to highlight is when you were talking about all these different multiple wireless fields, this came up in the last conversation, but maybe you might have some more to say on this. A lot of tiny homes have ColourBond on the outside for the cladding. So my understanding is that when you have ColourBond on the outside and then you have wireless on the inside, that those wireless fields are amplified by that ColourBond, and you're essentially creating this like microwave type situation inside your own home. So do you have anything to say about that situation?
Yeah,
I'm sure you have a lot.
absolutely. If we sell shielding and to shield your home, and the way that shielding works is it has metal in it, so metal will reflect the signal. Now that's a great thing. If you've got metal on your roof, for example, and you've got a mobile phone tower out there, then that metal roof is helping to reflect that signal away. And people think, well, that's all I've got to do. I just shield my home and I fix everything. But you don't. You actually create more problems because, as you said, what you're doing is you're reflecting the signals that you're generating back in. So if you can imagine all of those wireless devices, they've got a reach that would extend beyond your tiny home. Maybe, as I said before, maybe they could blanket an entire farm, and they're trying to get out that far. But what they do is they hit the shielded surface and they bounce back in. They hit another shielded surface, they bounce back in. So you've got these signals that are really bouncing around the metal walls of this home, whether it's a tiny home or a regular home. So you're potentially making your exposure worse. So this is really important. If you're going to put metal on your home, on your roof, you really can't afford to be generating signals that are going to be reflected by it. So that's a really important reason for not using wireless inside your home. Before, when I was talking about modems, people say, look, mine's not a problem because I've got it turned off. A lot of people tell me also, well, my modem is wired in, so I don't have a problem. But wiring in a modem doesn't make any difference. Your modem doesn't know that there's a wire attached to it. Your modem, if it's a wireless modem, is still emitting wireless radiation, even though you might have a wire attached to that and connected to, let's say, your desktop computer. So it comes back to using equipment that is not emitting radiation-free modem or router. Another thing that sometimes people do is they say, well, I've disabled the wireless in my modem or router, which you can do. And in fact, we can do it for you too. You can get into the settings of your wireless modem or router and you can disable the wireless for the time being. But the problem is it turns itself on again because there are updates coming through and they will just switch back your wireless radiation so that the modem is emitting radiation again, and you mightn't know because you know that you've disabled it, so you think that it's still safe, but it's irradiating you. And so for me, that's why it's so important to use radiation-free equipment, because you know that it can't turn around and at some point start irradiating you when you don't know about it.
Yes. Exactly. And I really love that you said that, because it reminds me of with my laptop, even though it's hardwired, every time there's an update and I've turned the Wi-Fi off, I've turned the Bluetooth off, and I've turned the location services off. I know those are the three main things, and I've measured it and it's in the green as I said before. But whenever there's an update, a software update, I've noticed that it automatically turns those things back on. And I think the first time I did that, I didn't realize it. And then one day I was working and I was like, and it might have only been for a day or something or two, but I was like, hang on a minute, the wireless has come back on, because usually there's like a line through that icon. And then I got my meter out and I was like, oh no. And then I looked in the settings and I was like, oh no, like I'm sitting here in high wireless fields and the Bluetooth's automatically been turned on. So's the wireless. The location services are still off, but that's a tricky thing that I've seen them do. And they do that with the iPhones too. Yeah, it's actually, I think it's the same thing when there's a software update or something like that. They're actually just turned back on. So that's a problem too. And I feel like I don't know, it's a bit sneaky or something. But
Yeah.
as you say, yeah, having the equipment that's not wireless, you don't even have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's getting harder because it used to be that we had, and people will remember this, it's not so long ago that we used to have radiation-free modems and routers. That was the norm. So that was all fine. And then suddenly they all went wireless. And it used to be that we had mobile phones that we could put on airplane mode and we had turned off the wireless. Now people put their phones on airplane mode and a lot of them are still emitting radiation. In other words, airplane mode doesn't work. And so people are sleeping with their mobile phone next to them thinking, oh, I'm safe. And they're not. It's still emitting radiation. And some of the modern phones don't allow you to turn off the radiation at all, ever, basically. So there is a trend for technology to be basically irradiating people without people being able to do anything about it. And that is quite alarming to me. And also because there's a trend for everything going wireless, it's getting harder and harder to get radiation-free equipment. So if you want to get radiation-free equipment, my advice is get it now while we can still get it, because we can't guarantee that even 6 months into the future, it'll still be around.
Sort of sometimes wonder, are they going to make it really hard for us? Yeah, some crazy things happening, but yeah, we need to let people know, there are other ways. Like, yes, technology, it's a very double-edged sword. There's so many great things about it. You and I can sit here in two different locations in Australia and have this conversation, and that's a beautiful thing. But I think it really is about mindful and safe use and educating people more and just making them aware, because I think some people or a lot of people still don't even know that it's a thing, and then they're using their devices in a way that's really unsafe and harming them and maybe their friends and family too. Just taking a quick break from the conversation to let you know, I'm now offering tiny house consulting. I get questions all the time about tiny house living and have lots to share from my own personal experiences of going through the design process of building a tiny, finding the right builder for me, living in a tiny home, as well as through speaking with guests on the show and beyond. So if you have questions about your specific situation and you want to dive deeper into where to start, preparing to transition into tiny living, how to find a parking space for your home, or talking through what some of the best options could be for you when it comes to creating your dream tiny life, just know that I'm here for you. You can head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/consult. I'd love to help you on your tiny journey. Now, back to the show. A topic that I wanted to just move into now, because it's a very, very common for tiny homes, especially if someone's living off the grid, and that's solar systems. Now, we talked a little bit about solar systems in the last episode on EMFs, regarding, the positioning of, say, the solar panels and not having them, like what you said before when we were electrical wiring, don't have the panels above your roof, where you're sleeping, because of the really high magnetic fields particularly. What we're seeing in the tiny house space a lot is different types of solar systems. So whether it's a solar trailer like what I have, there's different. I know that you helped me communicate with a company down in Victoria that does the Skybox, which is also an external solar system. Rather than being on a trailer, it's like a box, and the system is inside that. Some people have solar panels on their roof, but I think there's actually less people doing that now and more having external systems. But at the same time, I do also see people having all their little solar components, like the inverter, the battery, and everything inside their tiny home in a very close proximity and in a place that's not safe. Let's be honest. So, like I said before, you helped me navigate just the questions to ask the electrician or the company that I was talking to, because I was calling around trying to figure out, well, what's the best system for my particular situation, and what avenue do I want to go? So if someone is wanting to maybe call around different solar companies, or they want to have a conversation with their tiny house builder around creating a solar system that is as minimal EMFs as possible, what are some things that people can either look out for or just ask about? And maybe you talk about this in any of your courses, but just like a few little things here or there that people can think about.
With solar, it used to be that you could install solar systems that were, I'm going to say, much safer. So I have solar and I'm really happy with it and I don't have any issues. But the problem with modern solar is, what I see to be the worst problem with it is that it emits wireless radiation, or it can emit wireless radiation. So instead of connecting your solar panels up to your electricity supply with wires, which is the way mine was done and the way that they were all done back in the day, a lot of things are now connected wirelessly because it saves time, it saves money. And so if you've got a solar system in your house that's wireless, then that's a problem because you're being irradiated by the equipment that you've put in place yourself. So what we want to do is, number one, find a supplier that can provide you with solar panels that don't have wireless components. And as of last time I spoke to a solar company, they were able to provide that. But it's changing all the time because everything's being updated all the time and we're moving more and more towards wireless everything's. But have that conversation with various companies, because you want to make sure that the equipment itself is not emitting wireless radiation, and then you want to make sure that it's connected to the inverter and the inverter is not emitting wireless radiation. Basically, everything connected with wires and no wireless, because connecting things with wireless doesn't stop wireless radiation. You have to do that separately. So if you can do that, then that's going to be probably one of the most important things you can do. And the other thing, as you said, Lucy, is locating it sensibly. If you've got something that's giving off fields, you don't really want it right next to where you're going to be sleeping or where you're going to be sitting. And in a tiny house, that's probably just about everywhere. So if you can put something that's a little bit away from your tiny house, fantastic. Then your problems with magnetic fields and electric fields disappear because they drop off with distance.
For me, with the solar trailer that I've got, it's actually set up in a really good way where it's maybe I initially would have loved to have had it 20, 30 meters away, maybe even 50 meters away, but we kind of found that it just wasn't practical in the place that it is. So I probably got it about maybe 15 meters away, something like that, around the corner of the shed that's behind me, which is ColourBond and all of that too. But I also asked the electrician from the building company, because I actually went out there. I don't know if you remember this, but I got some of the EMF meters from you and I took them out there and I measured them and I asked the guy, can you please turn off your phone? Because that's going to, pick up what's in closest proximity to stuff like that. It was actually an education process for him, and he thought it was really cool being an electrician because he knows about all these fields, but he knows that they exist. And I think that's kind of the extent of it. He doesn't know the extra stuff. But I asked him, I said, can I please, well, actually, just to back up for a second. So the inverter that I think they used was like a smart solar type inverter and just components like that. So I actually said to him, can you find me something and I'm willing to pay a bit extra because often that's the case, that doesn't have Bluetooth or wireless fields. It's not smart or anything. And he managed to source it for me. And I paid you a little bit extra, but I'm prepared to do that. But what I found is that it is actually really hard, as you say, because everything's being updated into these wireless components. But he actually disabled the Bluetooth and he disabled the wireless fields, and I've measured it, and the wireless fields are not there. It's where it's the the electric and the magnetic that are still there. But as you say, drops off after about 1.5 meters or something. So if you're not spending time right beside it, then you're okay. But there's definitely things that, people can. Again, I think it's like that opportunity. Like if you're getting something constructed for you for your specific purpose for your tiny home, you actually have a really good opportunity to mindfully minimize your exposure with the solar system too, because especially if it's in closer proximity to your home. And even if it's further away, as you said, like before, these wireless fields can travel really far. It could stretch, right across the whole property. So yeah, I think there's lots of things we can do with it with a solar system.
Yeah, and I think for everything that you're buying for your new place, whether it's a tiny home or it's a regular house, you want to be asking the same sorts of questions because you buy a fridge, you think, well, a fridge is a pretty reasonable thing. It's pretty inert. It's not going to give off too much. But now, as you said before, there are smart fridges, there are smart stoves, there are smart washing machines. You're going to need to make sure that whatever you bring into your new home is not emitting radiation that you don't know about. So that means you can talk to the customer service people in the shop, but they don't really know anything about these fields and they can sometimes tell you anything. So when you find a brand that you like and a model that you like, ring up the company, ring up the manufacturer and talk to the technical team and say, does this fridge, this washing machine, this solar, whatever it might be, does this have the capacity to emit wireless radiation? And they will be able to tell you, that. Make sure they put it in writing because once you start introducing these things to your home, you can have awful problems. We had one lady who had a really sensitive family, and she went to extreme lengths and spent a lot of money putting all sorts of solutions and shielding in place to block radiation coming from outside. And then she discovered her fridge was a smart fridge. So for everything that she'd done, she's created another problem by buying this fridge that she didn't know about. So I think in the end she put some of our shielding fabric over the fridge door or over some part of the fridge to actually stop it putting out radiation. Yeah.
So that's worrying. And I think often people will also think, like, depending on what the appliance is, obviously everything will have or usually has like a plug to connect into like a 240 volt like AC power point. But often people will say, it's got a wire, so it must be like it's not, it's not wireless. It doesn't have Bluetooth or whatever. Just on that, I guess, speaking about Bluetooth, because that's something that so many devices have a Bluetooth function now, speakers, mobile phones, computers, even some of the most random things that you wouldn't think would warrant having a Bluetooth function do. People don't seem to know or just are not really that concerned about it. But what are your thoughts on things like Bluetooth, which is another wireless field. What about and look, this might be a separate sort of conversation, but like, what about the 5G and the 6G and the more and more and more it's going to become sort of higher amplified fields? What are your thoughts on all those things? Because they're very common everywhere now.
Well, the starting point is to not use those devices, the wireless devices. So, Bluetooth, Wi Fi, whatever name you want to give it, 3G, 2G, 4G, 5G, it's all a problem. There are people that are getting sick from all of those, sick from Bluetooth, sick from Wi Fi, sick from 2G, sick from 3G, sick from 4G, sick from 5G. So it's not this technology is a problem, but all the others are safe. They are all problems, and they're all problems for some people more than others because the way individuals respond differently to this radiation. So some people will react more to Bluetooth, some will react more to Wi-Fi, some will react to 2G, some will react to 3G. Because we're all physically very different, we react to the wavelengths of these different technologies differently. So the moral of the story from that is get rid of it all. Why give your child a doll that is, that's a smart doll, so that this child is holding this in front of their hands, it's irradiating them? Baby monitors, just I was going to say throw them out, but take them to the electronic waste service.
Yeah.
Get rid of this stuff because I know you might really like it, but this is doing damage to your body and to the bodies of anybody else in, whether they're visiting you or whether they live with you. So, I mean, maybe if you don't really worry about how it's affecting your health or somebody else's health, then go ahead and use it. But I think if we want to be healthy, we actually have to stop using unhealthy technologies. I think it's as simple as that. But that brings us to 5G, because why is 5G there? Well, the sole reason that 5G is there is because we use it, right? A lot of people say, I don't want 5G. The 5G tower, oh my goodness, terrible. But then they buy a 5G phone, right? Or we buy the smart devices to put in our homes that are all emitting or going to emit 5G radiation. So the technologies that are out there in society, the 5G, the 6G, the 7G, the 20G, whatever it is, they're there because we use them. If we all started saying, I'm not going to use anything wireless from now on, just theoretically, then these networks would not be profitable, and you would have all sorts of new industries that are there to provide us with radiation-free technology. So where we put our money is really, really important. If we don't want a 5G mobile phone tower outside our house, then we have to really start looking at what we're buying and what we're using and what we're giving to our kids.
It's a really good point. It's like it comes back to that notion of like voting with your dollars, right? And voting with your dollars means where are you spending your money, and then which businesses and companies and corporations are you actually supporting, because there is that continual supply and demand, and they're just going to keep on supplying whatever we're purchasing, even if we're speaking out against it. You're right. Actually, where it counts is where we're putting our dollars. And I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because I know there are going to be some people that will say things like, but because you've mentioned some of the different health effects that can take place and that of people have experienced over the years in regards to electromagnetic exposure. And people will say, but one, how do you know it's because of that? Like, could it not be something else? Could it not be related to something else? Like either, I don't know. I think there's a very small sort of in the sort of health and wellness space. I think often it's diet and lifestyle that gets talked about for the most part, but then a lot of the environmental stuff gets missed. And that there are definitely people talking about environmental things. But I think, as we know, there are lots of health issues that can be similar, say, from mold exposure, for example, or chemicals in the home or in food or in the environment. And then we've got electromagnetic fields. And I think we're just living in a completely mismatched environment to what we were actually designed for as humans. And this modern world that we live in has so many different coming at us. So how can we know that it is electromagnetic fields that could be impacting our health? And of course, it can manifest in different ways for different people. And some people just don't know.
Yeah, it's a really good question. How do we know? Because there are decades of research. There are thousands of studies out there now that in peer-reviewed scientific journals done by people who know what they're doing that are showing harmful effects of exposure. And some of them are showing it on humans. Some of them are showing it on animals. So it's not psychosomatic if it's on animals. And some of them are showing it on cells. We're seeing it on bees. We're seeing it on insects. We're seeing it on a whole range of organisms. So I think that there's enough evidence for us to be able to say, if not, my goodness me, radiation is proven to cause all of these problems. I think we've got enough evidence to be saying, I think there's a really good chance that this radiation is playing a factor in health problems. And my view is, because I value health, my view is, well, why take the risk? If you can use a safe technology and a dangerous technology, why would you choose the dangerous technology? I actually understand the reasons for that. But, for people out there, you have this choice, safe or dangerous. It's entirely up to you. And you can wait if you want to till the science says conclusively, look, this radiation causes cancer, or this, well, actually, the scientists are already saying there's enough evidence for that. We can wait for all of those things and we can continue to let our baby chew on our mobile phone or put our mobile phone on our baby bump. We can continue to do that. Or we can say, well, gosh, I don't want my fetus by the time they're 20 to be unhealthy because of something that I exposed them or caused them to be exposed to when they were, before they were born. So it comes back to what your own standards are, I suppose, and what you're prepared to do. And I talk to people all the time who say, I want to be healthy, but then you say, oh, well, what about, for example, your exposure to these wireless devices or your kids' use of wireless devices? Oh, I can't stop that. I can't stop my kids using their mobile phones or their tablets, or I do it, or we sit down together and we're all on our various wireless devices irradiating ourselves and each other, because really what she's really saying is that we're addicted to this technology and we're not prepared to change it. But my concern about that is, as a mother, is what lessons are we teaching our kids, apart from the fact that we're irradiating them and, changing the testicular function and the quality of their sperm and all these other things. What we're actually teaching them to do is not to talk to each other and not to talk to us. And as a mother of grown-up kids, the most valuable thing I get from my kids is our ability to converse with each other, to engage with each other. And if we had not done that when my kids were little, I don't think we would be doing it now. So we're actually teaching kids out of being able to engage with us now and later in life. And that, it actually frightens me to think about what human relationships are going to be like in another, say, 20 years, because we're stopping people from communicating, let's say, properly.
That's such a good point. These devices have sort of infiltrated our life, and there is this addictive quality. It's making our brains fire differently too. I definitely even know from myself of just, I actually grew up when we didn't have all of this stuff. So I haven't been a child of just social media and mobile phones like many of this generation now. Like I didn't get a a mobile phone until I was 18, and it was one of those bricks that, wasn't connected to the internet. But we're seeing now that it was actually interesting. I was in Sydney probably a month ago with my mum, and we were driving through Surrey Hills or something like that. And I said to mum, hey, when we stop at the traffic light, let's count how many people, or let's just have a look at, observe people, right? Literally every time we stopped, there's a group of people, every single person is looking down on their phone. There's even people walking down the street on their phone. And it's really sad to see that. Because I know for me, I'll leave my phone at home a lot of the time too. I will, any chance to sort of disconnect from that world to then be present in real life and have that face-to-face communication and that
Yeah.
connection. And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, did you about to say something?
Oh, just that I couldn't agree more. It's so important because I walk down the
Yeah.
street and I walk past someone who's that far away from me and they just walk past because they've got their earpods in or they're
Yeah.
on their phone. And I'm just thinking, my goodness, they're more engaged in something that's not real, that's not in front of them, than they
Yes.
are in what's in front of them. And what is happening to us as human beings if we can no longer notice a person or look at a person as we walk past them or no longer say hello.
Yeah.
We're turning off some very basic and intrinsic human behaviors here and thinking that
Yeah.
it's okay. Not to mention, if you've got these things in your ears, in
Yes.
both ears, what
Yes.
you are doing to your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I've observed for years now, because you can see me as we're talking on video here, right? Mine's wired, my earphones, and I will never put AirPods in for the exact reason that we're talking about today. And I don't think I've ever measured them myself, but I've seen people measure them with building biology EMF meters, and the fields are just out of the roof, and then and I've seen also like breastfeeding mums that have a little baby there and they've got the AirPods in, and I just go, oh no, like I feel
Yeah.
sad about that. But I just want to bring it back for a second, because you're mentioning before the scientific studies, and I think there's so much we can talk about here, because industry has a big part to play, just like every industry there is, whether it's the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, big agriculture, big finance. And I think I don't want to go in down the big rabbit hole here, but I have a sense, and I think a lot of us have seen that there's connections between a lot of these corporations, right? And it's exactly the same in the communications industry. And some people will talk about, oh, but it's non-ionizing radiation, so it's not harmful for us. And so we're okay. And then I say to those same people, okay, so would you go and put your head in a microwave oven and turn it on? And they're like, hell no, I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, we're kind of doing the same thing now with the wireless devices that are in close proximity to us, but it's just a slow burn over time. And just before I give you a chance to respond, I just wanted to highlight something that I did say at the beginning of the last episode, just to remind people, because I think it's something that it can make it hard for a lot of people to believe, because electromagnetic fields are not something we can see with the naked eye. But I feel like if we walked around and were able to see all those fields and they were visible to us, that we'd probably have a very different feeling about them. And we'd probably be like, oh my goodness, like, if you can see it, then it must be real. But if you can't see it, then it mustn't be an issue. And then I remind people, one, what about the wind, and what about your own breath? You can't see it, but you can feel it. So, and we know these things to be true, that there is such a thing as a breath, and there is such a thing as the wind, and that we can feel them. And then the other part to that is the analogy of the airplane, when they tell us, please switch off your devices because you don't want these devices to interfere with the functioning of the plane. The reality is that we're also electromagnetic beings, and our nervous system runs on, electrical pulses, and our whole body, communicates to our whole body, and
Mm.
functions of the organs and everything like that. But people don't, there's a disconnect there. So having said that, when we hear about these industry studies or these industry headlines and what's out in the media and they tell us it's not an issue, are you able to just share with us? And you can answer anything that I just said there, but also maybe including just the other side of the industry that has an influence in some of these studies or these media articles and headlines and programs that say, oh, EMFs are not an issue. Don't worry about them.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because I've got nearly 30 years of watching what's been going on in society to draw on to answer that question.
Yeah.
But it used to be that the media would run stories on the risks of mobile phones or the risks of Wi-Fi or various things. But over time, there were some very concerted attacks on journalists and programs that did that in Australia, leading to journalists being sacked and programs basically being taken off air as a result of revealing information that's actually true. So the fact that you don't see it on the media doesn't mean that it's real. I have a blog that you would know of, Lucy, that goes out basically once a week, and most of it is research saying, here's a study that came out and found harmful effects of this, here's a study that found harmful effects of that. So the evidence is there and people can find it for free on our webpage. But the other day I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Nicholas Chartres, I tried to pronounce that correctly, from Sydney University, on actually, he was talking to me about what the biggest cause of disease and death is in the world. So I'm thinking EMR or, chemicals or, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, and his answer was it's corporate, it's corporate organizations, it's big business. And he referred to the fact that when tobacco was found to be harmful, and we all know how industry pushed tobacco and doctors pushed tobacco and governments pushed tobacco, and there was advertising for cigarettes. When some of the litigation commenced against the tobacco industry, the tobacco industry was forced to release its private internal documents. And as a result of that, thousands and thousands of documents ended up at the University of California. So we really now have, or they really have now, basically a how-to of how to manipulate governments, of how to manipulate the science so that the end result is they get to do what they want to and we, the public, have no power. So the fact that we're not seeing things in mainstream media doesn't mean that they're not there to be seen. It means that there are some very interesting techniques being used by some people who've got a lot of money, and these techniques are being shared by lots of corporations now to push products on us that we know basically to be unsafe. So it really comes back to us, if we want to be safe, not necessarily trusting the standards out there or the guidelines or even some of the scientists who might be linked to industry or linked to governments that have got vested interests. It comes back to us saying, do we think there could be a problem here? Okay, yes, there's evidence. There are thousands of studies showing problems. Do we want to do something about it? Yes, we do. Okay, this is what we're going to have to do about it, or this is what we can do about it. But then recognizing along the way that that is not necessarily going to be easy. If you want to be healthy, you might want to give up sugar. Who wants to give up sugar? We might like ice cream. We might like lollies. We might like, cakes and things. It's not easy for us to give up things that we're addicted to, whether it's sugar or whether it's wireless devices. And we know that wireless devices are being made and basically programmed in ways that cause us to be addicted. That's been revealed by whistleblowers for many years. We know that they're triggering things like dopamine that give us a feeling of a lift, that give us a feeling of being happy.
Yeah.
Or our mood being elevated. So the technology is being devised in order to make us addicted. We're going to actually have to confront our addiction if we want to be safe.
No, it's true. And I think there's a lot of things coming at us that do have that dopamine effect, doesn't it? Like that instant gratification, which that feeling is fleeting, but in the moment, you can see how it's like it is this temporary lift, but then, with that is just it's like is it worth the cost of admission, Like I think there's for an instant gratification versus maybe a long-term potential effects that, as you said earlier in the conversation, we don't know what the actual effects are going to be in the long term. Like we can have an idea because we're seeing some different effects happening to people in the short term, and some people that may not be as sensitive will maybe not have things manifest in the same ways that other people do that are highly sensitive. It is a bit of an experiment, and it's a risk, and it's just kind of taking a chance. And I'm just remembering that example that you mentioned before to the lady that said that, she didn't want to give up, wireless devices or whatever it might be. And I think out of everything we're talking about, I guess like a sort of bigger picture thing is that like what it comes down to is what do you value in your life? What is most important to you? And I don't think many of us are going to be, in our last days looking back at our life and going, wow, I'm really glad that I spent so much time on a computer screen or on my mobile phone or with these devices. Like, I think there's so much more of life that to be had and to experience, and the beauties of life. And we talked about human connection before too. It's these things that are actually so much more important, and it's this other stuff that's taking us away from what is truly important, and with those addictive qualities and things like that.
I couldn't agree more. And what it's doing is it's
Yeah.
taking us out of nature, because
Yeah.
instead of kids being outside kicking balls around, playing, yelling, talking to each other, they've been sitting on devices. And even schools have said that once they introduced bans on mobile phones, the kids' behavior changed because they started talking to each other again. They started
Yeah.
playing with each other again.
Yeah.
So, how, for me, how frightening is it that we've got a device that's actually causing people's behavior to entirely change from the norm?
Yes,
We're watching
exactly.
that happening and we're not doing anything about it. And, again, as parents, I think we've got to be asking these questions. And I think we've got to be conscious of every decision that we make. If we're going somewhere and we pick up our mobile phone automatically to put in our pocket, we're going to the supermarket to buy eggs. Do we need our mobile phone to go to the supermarket to buy eggs? Let's be conscious of what we're doing and make decisions about it. And if you want to take your mobile phone to the supermarket to buy eggs, that's okay with me. But what I'm saying is think about it. Don't just act on habit all the time. Look at your kids outside or playing and kicking the balls, or look at them inside on their computer with their door closed and the lights on till 1 o'clock in the morning, and ask yourself, is that the way? Is that an optimum way for these kids to be living? Let's start to make choices about what we want in our life, not just what's become a bad habit that's entrenched.
Yeah. Habit and convenience, I think, are these like big parts of the puzzle.
Mm.
And there are so many things we can do. And I know that it can sound like an overwhelming topic for people. And it's also something that I think, especially in light of everything that's happened in the last few years, there's been controversy around it too. And there's been people taking sides and people not believing. And I think that just the very thing that we're talking about of us actually just being so distracted from everything because of these devices that some people are not noticing how they're feeling and how they're actually being impacted. And I know for myself, now that I've really taken myself out of living in the city to a remote place where, I did an EMF assessment. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, a remote assessment through a building biologist who actually area that I'm living in and where the closest mobile phone towers are and other things like that. I can feel the difference in how I just feel in my body. Like I feel so much more calm. And then when I go into, and even when I used to have a Wi-Fi modem at home many years ago, I noticed I would get headaches. And I know that it was it was related to that. And even when I just thinking about like being in public places where that's a big thing now too, is like I actually have to really psych myself up to be in a public, like it's not like it's like a big deal, but it's just something in my awareness now that I know, okay, I'm going to this place, is going to be hundreds of people, which means there's going to also be hundreds of smartphones, right? I notice how that I feel physically after being in an environment like that. Like I just feel drained and yeah, like headachy, and I can actually feel the vibration like in different parts of my head and different parts of my body. And I think a lot of people are not sensitized to that. And there's a lot of reasons why that could be. And I just think one of them is that we're so distracted and we're so busy on these devices and we're not even noticing how we're feeling a lot of the time, or putting it down to something else, when actually everything that we do and everything we put in our body and everything we surround ourselves with, including people, has an impact on us in some way, has an impact on how we feel, on how we live our lives. And I think there's, I guess we're just kind of zooming out and talking bigger picture here. EMFs are a small piece of the puzzle, but there are so many things that we can do to sort of live a healthier life, right? And this is one piece of the puzzle that I think is really important to consider. It's often dismissed or not taken seriously, but in a tiny home, like we've been talking about today, I think this conversation is even more important because of the proximity of these things being in our space. And I'm just wondering, as we sort of start to close out the conversation today, I want to talk more about some of these things that you have, your programs, your consulting, and anything else you want to share. But before we do that, is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with in regards to just maybe summing up what we talked about today, or even maybe just any other kind of practical things? Like, what's one or two things, if someone's listening to this conversation today, what's something that they could do tomorrow? I know you did provide some practical things, but just something really easy, that sort of quick win that someone can have. There's sort of a bit of a no-brainer, and maybe they think that it's so inconvenient and so hard, but actually it's not that hard if they just choose that they want to value this and they want to do it.
Yeah, well, turn off your devices. Really, turn things off at the power point. When people come into my home, they say it feels really good, or they feel better. Even people that you wouldn't think that would be sensitive, because their body's not being bombarded by this. So turn it off. There are so many things. Start a new habit. Go for a walk outside, or go and work in the garden. Go and do something in nature that nature counteracts the stress in your body, and EMR causes stress in your body. So go and do something that counters that. Go and experience what it feels like to actually be somewhere that's away from all of this exposure. Go for a walk in the national park or something like that, and leave your mobile phone at home, or leave it in the car, leave it turned off, and start to think about this. What do you value? What do you want your future to look like? What do you want your relationships to look like? And what do you want your family's health to look like? Not just now, but in the future, because the pattern that you can see now is only going to get more entrenched unless you change it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And when you just talked about the garden there, it reminded me, maybe a question people can ask themselves is, when I do go out into the garden, just like what you said before, do I actually need to take my phone with me while I'm out gardening? Like, and some people will do it because they want to take photos of themselves or take a video and post it online and all of that. And look, I've done things like that, but I've actually switched over to a video camcorder that doesn't have any wireless or anything, so that I'm choosing to minimize not using my phone to take things anymore. But even that whole thing, and look, it's not a judgment. There's a culture now of, just showing people what's happening in their life and all of that. But I think it's like coming back to being intentional. It's like, if I go out to work in the garden, it's because I want to be away from all of that, and I just want to have that peace and quiet, and I just want to focus on this one thing that I'm doing, like, rather than all this multitasking. And I want to get my hands in the soil and I want to see, the little earthworms in the soil and just smell the fresh air and actually just be so present and feel just so far away from all the noise and the distraction and the technology. Like I don't need my phone for that. But I know that some people will be like, well, I want to go out in the garden and then I'll listen to a podcast at the same time. So I'll take my smartphone. And look, if you want to do that, that's fine. But I think these little micro choices that we have, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast in other ways, this is another micro choice that you can make that actually could have a really big impact on your health. Because if you work in the garden every day, well, let's say 300 days a year, and you don't take your phone for those 300 days a year for an hour or 2 hours that you're out there, that's actually many, many hours over your lifetime that you've minimized that exposure to that wireless radiation that could potentially impact your health. And then you think about that in reverse. How many hours are you spending with that in your proximity, and then you're not feeling well, or you've got a headache and or it
Rest.
leads into something worse. You're stressed. Absolutely, you're on edge. So we do have, I think, in tiny life, especially where most people are living on rural acreage, we have the opportunity to get away from a lot of that much more than when you are in the city.
Yeah, and it comes back to choosing what life are we living? Are we living the life
Yeah.
that we want and that's good for us? Or are we living the life that somebody else on Facebook is telling us that we ought to live and that we should be following them and dressing like them and look what they had for breakfast? And do we care what they had for breakfast?
Yeah.
Where do our
Yeah.
values actually
Yeah.
lie and what's important to us? And also what are we modeling to our kids? And a lot
Yeah.
of uh, behavior problems that we see in kids, a lot of it is competing for attention for mum who's on her device. So I think let's start really thinking about how is this impacting on your life and what life do you want and what life do you want your kids to have, and if you can answer some of those questions, then you're going to be able to work out what kind of technology do you want in your home that facilitates that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Lynn, I would love if you're able to share with us. So you mentioned earlier on you've got that course for electricians. You've also got some EMF meters, and I know you've got a newer one around the 5G
Mm,
measuring, and then you've got digital detox program. And I know that you also have like many EMF friendly products that can help people. So can
yeah.
you let us know just a little bit about whatever you want to share? You do consulting as well. Anything that you want to share and how people can work with you, and what you want to let them know about all of those.
Thanks. Well, the first thing is don't believe everything that you see out there, because I'm staggered beyond belief at some of the things that people are saying about this issue that are just so untrue. If you want to know what your exposure is, don't ring me up and ask me what your exposure is, because there's no way that anybody can answer that question. You have to measure it. This is the meter. Can you see that, Lucy?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So that's the meter that we have that we rather like, because it's the only one in the world that measures such a wide range of frequencies and measures the technology or the 5G technology that's, excuse me, around now, but also the high frequencies that are coming out. So that goes up to 40 gigahertz. So we have that. But the other thing, if people want to get started, I'd say first thing, book a consultation with me, because we go through, what is in your home, do a little floor plan of your home, show me what your technologies are, where they are, and then we can talk it through. Don't go out and buy random products, because people are buying all sorts of random products that are actually not right for them and not reducing their exposure or making their exposure worse. And I say to people, well, don't even buy anything from me. And I like to think that I'm ethical until you have this conversation, because you might be buying a product from me that's perfectly good product, but it's not right for what you're trying to achieve. So you have to look at your exposure in context. It's not about, oh, I've got a smart meter, let's fix the smart meter problem and forget everything else that's in the house. No, it all works together. All of these devices in your home are are worth considering, are worth talking about, are worth fixing. And fixing one problem and ignoring the rest can actually make your exposure worse. Because, as I said, if you put shielding on, you can be reflecting the signal. So you don't want to just do random things. So book a consultation, and we can coach you or talk you through what your options are to make things easier for you. And you can book as many coaching sessions as you want. If you're having trouble with addiction, then talk to me about that so that we can work through some of those issues or give you options about how to do things. Start to look at how you can set your home up safely with radiation-free internet. That's a really important starting point for people too. So I think we've really got all of the solutions, and we've got all of the meters that people really need to measure and reduce exposure. And it excites me when someone does say, "This is what I want to do in my home," because that's the best gift you can give your family, isn't it? The gift of safety.
Yeah, safety and health. And I'll just say a few words here because I feel like I can vouch for what you do and just what you're helping people with, because I've known you for 6 or 7 years now, I think, at this point. And we've, as I said before, we've consulted many times, and you've been so helpful for me and really patient. And, I've just been really grateful to be able to, come to you and do some kind of session or consultation, or have the support of being able to get an EMF meter, which I found really valuable, especially during the whole tiny house journey. And I still have uses for these meters. And actually I was telling you offline that I'm going to be moving my parking space later on this year, and I'm going to be, when I go to the actual parking space, I'm going to go and measure out there too, just to make sure that I'm parking my tiny house in the best proximity possible with the least amount of exposure and all of that. Just jumping in here quickly, because when I mentioned my parking space, I would have loved to have dived deeper with Lyn around some things to look for when you're finding a parking space to reduce your exposure to electromagnetic fields. But we were running over time, so I asked Lyn after the show a few important points to consider when looking for a parking space for your tiny home around electromagnetic fields. And the main things that she said was to measure magnetic fields to ensure that the site is not being affected by power lines and wiring above or below ground. And then measure wireless radiation to ensure that background levels are low and identify any sources that are problematic. So definitely try and park your tiny as far away from power lines as you can. And I believe Lyn says at least 100 meters away, but obviously the further away, the better. And if you're interested in looking into some EMF meters to measure electric, magnetic, and wireless fields, you can check out the EMR Australia website. So I bought one from EMR Australia for electric and magnetic fields, and then I've also got a different building biology wireless fields meter, and I'll put a link in the show notes for that too. All right, let's get back to the show because we're almost at the very end. I think that this is definitely an area that, some people are just like, I don't even know where to start. So if you're listening to us at home, I definitely recommend, if you just want someone to talk to, or, the best place to start and give you the first few steps, definitely, go and get in contact with Lyn, because it's been really invaluable in what I've been able to do on the back of the support for Lyn. So where's the best place that people, would it be your website that you want them to come to contact you? And what about social media as well?
Oh, well, website is a good place because that's got really everything, but we're on YouTube, Telegram, Facebook, LinkedIn. So, yeah, but there is more information on our webpage. So that's what I would encourage people to go to first. EMR
Yeah. And
Australia.
so, yeah, beautiful. So emraustralia.com.au.
That's right. Yes.
Beautiful. And then you mentioned before, because I know you do it on part of your newsletter, so you send out your newsletter regularly as well with the latest that's happening in this space with different scientific studies and all of that. So people can find that on your website as well. And I'll put a link in the show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com for, all the different things that we spoke about today, as well as where people can come and contact with you. And Lyn, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. I'm really grateful that we're able to have this conversation. I feel like this is a topic that, we're only just scratching the surface, and we could talk about it for days, weeks, months. And I just really appreciate the work that you've been doing, for almost 30 years now. And you've been sort of a trooper in this area. And I know you've probably come up against resistance and frustration and just the different changes that you've seen over the years and how far we're going with technology now. And you're, coming up against seeing, industry as well as just seeing the effects that this is having on people. So just thank you so much for still continuing to show up and to be here and to be a voice in this space, and for sharing all your wisdom and your heart and knowledge with everyone today, and for just being so passionate about this topic that a lot of people sort of may tend to shy away from because it can be controversial and it can be overwhelming, and there's just lots to consider. But thank you for breaking it down and making it a bit more digestible for us, and just for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you so much, Lucy. I'm really delighted to be talking to you today and delighted to be getting this message out because I am passionate about it and because I really care. I was saying to you earlier that so many people that I know in this area are really, really suffering, and I don't want anybody else to, to really go down that path. So stop your exposure before you get to the point of it affecting your body so badly that you become sensitive to it as well. And, let's do what we can to protect kids. I love the idea of lovely, healthy kids growing up in a health and safe world. And that's, I think, what we're aiming for. I think that's what we all want too. So we can build that together.
Definitely. I think it's coming back to that, just those values and that intention, and how do we actually want to live, and then what future do we want for the children that are coming through and that are going to be here long after we're gone, So I think there's a real opportunity here for for change, for education, and just for coming back to what's most important. So thank you again for everything that you do, Lyn. And if you're listening to us at home, thank you so much for being here. Make sure you go check out what Lyn is doing. She has been such a help to me, as I mentioned, and is a wealth of information, as you probably realized today. And stay tuned every Thursday for new episodes of Tiny House Conversations. We'll see you next week. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.